Hello chess family, it's me again, National Master Jesse James, and today we're going to be looking at another game in logical chess. This time we're going to be looking at the English opening with Pashash versus Floor. Let's go ahead and see how Black responds to this. We're going to go ahead and start off with c4, of course, for the English opening, and here Black is going to play one of the main lines and play pawn to e5. Now this is a very interesting way to play against the English. We also have different ways to respond against it, of course. You got the symmetrical line, which is basically just kind of copying your opponent. We have the knight of 6 lines, which you can try to transpose into like a king's Indian or a main line d4. Or if you're really feeling spicy, you might even try a Dutch defense. And this one, like I said, this is just going to be the main line with pawn to e5. This is almost like playing a reverse Sicilian as white. As you can see, white has played c4, and black is going to respond with d5. So basically, you're playing the white side of the Sicilian. You're just playing it as black in your pawn move down, right? Well, even though this is a pawn move down, you can still achieve equality and some decent games here. A lot of strong players do play like this. So here we go. e5 gets played, and white continues with knight to c3. One of the main ideas of the English is to control this d5 square, if you couldn't tell, right? With these last two moves, white has the knight and the bishop. Typically, what they're going to do next is play the pawn out, bring the bishop out, and they're going to try to control the light squares. That's where you're going to see this pawn structure, pawn on d3. So you see that e4 and d5 are being controlled. And when the bishop comes there, of course, these light squares are being controlled again. So black goes ahead and continues with the regular kind of style of playing the Sicilian as white. Knight to f6, pawn to g3. Again, white's going to be putting the bishop on the light square diagonal to control these light squares. And black continues just like we should. What are you playing in the Sicilian as white? Of course, you got to control the center, so you're going to be playing this pawn to d5 right here. And, well, your best move is to go ahead and take, so white's more than happy to take. C takes d5, knight takes d5, and bishop g2. Here already we have our first question. What is black's best move here? Now, if you were playing this as black, well, or as white, you would play a different move here. I'll give you a second. Let's see if you can find the best move here. Hopefully you found it. So if you were playing this from the white perspective, you would play bishop b6 without even thinking too much, right? Bishop b6 gets played in the regular version. Unfortunately, when you're playing black against this is not the case. This is where the opening actually changes a little bit. If you play bishop b6, white's already better after pawn to d4 here. This is going to free up the light square bishop and open white's game. Black is going to lose his only pawn in the center here by a trade. Of course, we can't play something like e5 here. So here, white is running much better in the position. They've opened up the last bishop they need to get into the game. And of course, like I said, black lost their only pawn in the center. So if you said bishop b6, I'm sorry, that's incorrect. Now that you know the idea that white wants to play d4 here, all you have to do is stop it. Here you just play the regular move, at least in a long-term line. You play knight b6, which is a very common move that you play as white. In their case, they play knight to b3 to stop these kind of moves. So knight b6 gets played. Of course, d4 can't be played now as, well, we'll just take back. And white continues with their development. Knight to f3, knight to c6, of course, developing and defending the pawn, castles. And here another good question: where do we place this dark square bishop? Should we go to e7, d6, c5, or maybe even b4 to trade off? Let's take a look. If you said bishop d6, unfortunately, you fell for it again. d4 gets played, and then now you've lost your center pawn. Incorrect. Let's take a look at the next one. What about bishop c5? The bishop here is very misplaced because you see the bishop can't be moved back to b6 here. So after something like a3, it's getting a little annoying for the bishop, especially because you always want your pieces being defended. Now black can play a5 here, but again, the bishop is just a little misplaced here. The bishop is not going to be doing too much work attacking f2 as this is being highly defended. The last one would be bishop to b4. Now you could play for this plan. The plan is to trade off the bishop for the knight. I would tell you if I'm playing this position as white, I'm very happy. In fact, it's actually quite known in a lot of Sicilians you're not supposed to be trading off your bishop for the knight. Reason being is that, let's just say white just goes ahead and plays a3. When you trade here, we always take back toward the center, and after castles here, you see that white already can get rid of this pawn, or at least start getting a strong center here with pawn to d4. And if you take, well, now you see you've lost your only center pawn, and white even has an open file for the rook. Again, this is very standard for a lot of Sicilians. So that's not the move that you want to choose. Here, we just want to choose a simple move, which is bishop e7. What's the bishop going to do here? Well, sometimes we'll play like f5, put the bishop to f6, or maybe just leave it there. This is kind of an awkward looking bishop. What else can we say? So let's go ahead and continue. Pawn to d3 gets played, another very standard move. We couldn't go d4 as black was controlling it. Then we need to get the bishop out. And like we had talked about before, white is trying to control these light squares in the center here. So this move makes perfect sense. Black's just going to play nice and simple here. We're going to go ahead and castle, of course. And where should we move this bishop to for white? Remember, we want to develop all our minors first, which are the knights and bishops. Should we go to d2 or e3? Obviously, f4 is taken out by the pawn, and g5 is taken out by the bishop. Hopefully you found it. It's bishop to e3. Now here white has a very easy plan. When you're playing the English, you're going to be most of the time going for an attack on the queen side. You can see that white has set themselves perfectly. They have the bishops pointed this way. The rook's going to come over to the c file and try to put pressure on the c7 pawn. And most of the time they'll use a pawn storm to even try to kick the knight away so c7 can be attacked. Now because white is going queenside, what should black do? Well, a lot of times what happens when these kind of imbalances happen is whenever one person goes one way, we go the other way. If you try to go that way, well, white already has a very good setup for this, and black won't do too well. So here we can either try to control the center, which we're trying to do that by keeping this close, and then we go for a kingside attack. We're going to see how Floor does this. So black goes ahead and plays a nice tricky move here, bishop g4. And the reason why this is tricky is because he's trying to induce a weakness, which unfortunately for Pashash, he does not notice, and he plays pawn to h3. This is exactly the weakness we want to play. He goes ahead and plays bishop back to h5. What does white play here? Develop with a threat. Rook to c1. The threat here is, of course, just moving the knight so that the rook can start putting pressure down the c file. Remember, this is white's plan. We're going to go queenside attack. And here another nice tricky move here by black. Queen to d7 here. Now this does come with a threat. I hope you can spot it. Now this threat only came because of bishop going to g4 and inducing h3. Do you see the idea? Unfortunately for white, they did not see it, and so white continued with their plan. Knight to a4, a very nice move here and a very standard plan. We're not trying to trade on b6 as this will only improve black's pawn center, and actually this will make it very hard for white to break through on the queen side with this pawn structure. White's actually looking to play something like knight c5. And you can see that the knight can then take on b7 threats. And then if b7 becomes weak, well then the knight on c6 can get weak. You can see again, white is trying to control these light squares, and they're doing a very good job at that. So black has to make sure that they're making threats the whole time, or else white will just storm through on the queen side. So here was a threat. Hopefully you find it. What does black play here to get a better position? Here was the move. It may be surprising for you, but remember, always look for your moves, checks, captures, and threats. And here the move is bishop takes f3. It seems like a really weird idea to get rid of this bishop. Most of the time, we want to trade off this bishop for this bishop so that the king side gets weak. Well, here we're going to be creating a structural weakness, or white will lose a pawn. Well, white went ahead and played bishop takes h3. It may seem like a strange move here, but if we do go ahead and take back with the pawn, you see what we get, one of the pawn weaknesses, the three different pawns of weaknesses, the isolated pawn. Here, black has plenty of compensation for this. Later on, white will play something like f4 to get rid of this pawn, but d3 will become devastatingly weak. And so black is more than happy just to bring the rook over and start putting pressure on the d3 pawn. So white did not want to deal with this, so they went ahead and played bishop takes h3. Free money, let's go ahead and take it. The bishop was defending the pawn on h3, so queen takes on h3. Now this is already a good sign that black is starting to build up on the king side for the attack. Remember, white's going to be going queen side, so let's go ahead and go king side. We're going to try to keep the center closed, because if you keep the center open, then white may be able to start opening up and then even defend the king. So white's turn. White went ahead and played bishop takes c6. Now I think this is a huge positional blunder, or a strategic blunder. This is the main defender for your bishop, but white got greedy here. White said, look, there's a free pawn here. I'm going to be able to mess up black's pawn structure. But this is the perfect gambit or risk that black wants to take in this game. He's going to give up the queen side, but he's going to go for a king side attack. Let's see how he does it. Pawn takes back. Of course, white gets greedy and grabs the pawn. Well, we mentioned that we're going to be doing a king side attack, so let's start bringing our pieces over to the king side. There's two, actually I'll go with three good moves here you can play with black. Just find one of them. I like the one that black plays because it's the most forcing. Which one did you choose? Hopefully you chose the strongest move, which is Knight to d5. Knight d5 comes up with a huge threat of knight takes knight takes bishop, pawn takes, and then queen takes g3. There's no more pawns in front of this king. We're just going to start attacking it. Now, if you chose some other moves, there's some other strong ideas here. We could play the bishop to d6. Now, this bishop move is also pretty decent. It defends the pawn and also aims toward this this g3 pawn for maybe some sacrifices like pawn to e4. Another decent idea might be something like rook to d8 to do a Capablanca rook lift over here. Maybe g6, maybe not h6 right now as the bishop's defending. And the last move, I won't say just yet because this move is going to get played. But hopefully you see another very strong move here to continue your kingside attack. So, knight d5 was played. And white plays a very interesting move here. One I definitely would not think about playing. Queen to e1. It's a very interesting idea to try and defend this g3 pawn. Now, if you continue with knight takes, pawn takes, this is okay, but it's a little bit inaccurate, as now you're allowing white to jump in with something like queen f2. And after queen gets to f2, there's not going to be many checkmating ideas because the queen is going to be able to hold them off. And if white can hold off the checkmates or the kingside attack, well, then the queen side is already messed up. You can see that black has two isolated pawns on the queen side. This should be a very good game for white here. We want to take on e3, but we want to take at the right moment. We don't want to allow them queen f2 ideas. All right, this was the strong move I was talking about. The last one from the last position. What is another very strong move here for black to start the kingside attack? Hopefully you found this move. We're going to be playing pawn to f5. Of course we're going to play this move. This is a great move for many reasons. One of the ideas being, well, we're going to threaten pawn to f4, again, to mess up the pawn structure. I do want to note real quick, if you had taken on e3, this pawn f4 would not have been strong. Pawn f5 comes with a strong idea of f4, harassing this bishop, but again, attacking this weakness on g3. Another good idea about this is our rook lift ideas. Remember we talked about the rook lift? This time, we not only got the pawn forward, but maybe rook lift. Of course, we're not going to do it right away with the rook on c6. So f5 is a very strong idea here. If you are worried about your king, don't worry. Right now, the only bad things that could happen will be on the light squares, and white does not have any pieces on the light squares. Now, if white had a light square bishop, you'd probably think about it a little bit more. If the queen could jump to like b3, maybe we think about it a little bit more. But right now, black has too many threats here. Our king is nice and safe. Even if they do get on the light squares, we can just play our king over to h8, and the king is very safe in the corner over there. All right, let's continue with this attack. White goes ahead and plays bishop c5. Of course, white wants to go ahead and trade off some pieces here. And, well, let's not waste any time. What do we play here? Hopefully you found it. Make threats every move. Pawn to f4. If you're thinking about trading here, don't go along with your opponent's plan. Remember, always think about the force moves. Always look about attacking them first. After bishop takes, knight takes, yeah, you can play something like f4 here. But again, don't help out your opponent. Now the knight's a little bit closer and might even be able to make some threats to stop your attack. So, pawn to f4 got played. And, of course, black goes ahead and plays. Or white goes ahead and plays bishop takes on e7. Look for those forced moves. Another strong move by black here. After this, the game's pretty much over. The next combination is pretty much all forced, and there's no way to get out of it. Of course, if you're thinking about taking back the bishop, remember, forced moves here. We're going for the attack. We're going against this guy. All right, hopefully you calculate the line correctly. We're going to take on g3 first. Notice we can't even take on f8 right now because of checkmate. So this is pretty much a forced move. White has to take back on g3, right? So they take back. And now the killer move here. After this, the game is completely over. What do you play? Knight to e3. Just giving up the rook over here because the main idea is the checkmate on g2. White cannot stop this at all, at least without losing heavy material like the queen here. So we're threatening queen to g2 checkmate. We're threatening rook takes to f1 for checkmate. White tried their best. They went ahead and, because they didn't want to lose their rook, they went ahead and played rook takes on f8. And of course, black played the best move. We got to take back or else we're just losing. Rook takes on f8. And now the double threats there. Rook to f1 for checkmate and queen to g2 for checkmate. Here, white would have to play something like queen to f2. And after that, the simple move is just rook takes on f2. And this is just too much material. Black will be winning this game quite easily. Well, hope you enjoyed this game. This was a nice game demonstrating how to play the e5 lines against the English. I'll see you later, chess family.